Well, hello and welcome to this special edition of What Makes a Difference. And so in a week or so's time, we've got a workshop all about neurodifference and what it means for people. So we were having a bit of discussion about ways in the workplace or ways that we've done things to help make those adjustments for ourselves. And we thought it'd be useful to go over a bit of them for people.
And it's not meant to be an exhaustive Bible of do's and don'ts, but we thought there are some simple things that everybody can do pretty much immediately that you don't need to know if someone has a neurodifference or not, or is neurodifferent or not. Because the nice thing is it makes life easier and better for absolutely everyone.
Yes. And so this is what we also work with, isn't it, Ali? Is neurodifferences.
Yeah, we can support individuals with learning and understanding their own neurodifference. We can support teams
Mhm.
working with individuals and within the team with neurodifferences. And the nice thing, I'm going to say it again, is that when we do workshops or work like that, it is a positive benefit for absolutely everyone.
Yeah,
So when
definitely.
I look at the coaching, whether that's specifically to support someone with a neurodifference and travel with them as they learn about themselves, or whether that's maybe leadership or executive coaching, quite often the topics are the same.
Hmm.
And what works for one group is beneficial for everyone.
Yeah. And it's that everybody's favorite topic at the moment, isn't it? Equality, diversity, and inclusion. So by making these adjustments in the workplace, you are pretty much helping to include more people into that workplace and make them feel valued.
I think sometimes a big challenge and a consideration is whether or not, as an employer, you will be able to adapt and meet everyone's
Hmm.
needs. And it's not about that. Because there comes a point and a limitation for that if you have to individualize absolutely
Yeah.
everything, where it becomes impractical and impossible to
Mm.
sustain. But there are things that we all can do, and again, recurring theme, that benefits everyone.
Mhm.
So why would we not?
Yeah. Makes if it makes life easier for people.
One of the first questions I ask someone when I'm working with them when they have a neurodifference is tell me how you experience that for you. Because everyone's unique and different. But that's a powerful question who, no matter who I'm working for, because one of the first questions I ask somebody else I'm coaching is, tell me how you experience that for you.
Mhm.
Those questions are very similar, aren't they?
Very much so.
Mm, funny that.
Yeah.
So what are the big things that bump your gums that make life more awkward that you would like to see other people adapting and doing differently?
So one thing is telephone numbers,
Hmm.
long strings of numbers, and it just goes, is that the right number? Is that the wrong number? Is this the right order? So if telephone numbers can be separated into two digits, like the French do quite a bit, that makes it so much easier to read. And you go, right, okay, that is that, and that. And the
Hmm.
input's easier.
It's also
Writing,
easy to remember.
yeah, yeah. And writing things in bold, I think a lot of people struggle with that as well, depending on the font, isn't it?
Oh, font, some font.
Yeah,
Now, yeah, there are
yeah.
some fonts that I find almost impossible to read.
Hmm. Yeah. So mentioned the other day in the podcast is a friend of mine, Orlando. He runs his course, and he had printed or he had typed everything up in, I call it New Times Roman, and it isn't, but it makes no sense to me. And so it was like, can you please change his font over because it's really, really hard to read? And thankfully he did. So he took that on board. He just did it to make the adjustments for himself and hopefully for other people to go, okay, this makes it a lot simpler to read.
I think that's a nice thing about technology now. I mean, when computers first came out, Times New Roman was pretty much the only font you almost had. I
Mm,
think you had maybe a choice of three or four, and that was about it. But there are some really, really challenging fonts out there.
yeah.
And the more squiggly and the more serifs, the wee curly flicky bits at the end of letters
But
and
what
stuff.
bits at the end?
Flicky bits.
Oh, flicky bits. I thought you said something else.
Flicky bits. You know how sometimes the T's have wings at the ends
Uh-huh.
and it's like they have little fancy squiggly bits and kick up bits and added extras on. And the more of those there are, the harder it becomes to read because the
Hmm.
letters kind of jump. It's almost like there's too much fuss round about them.
Yeah.
And spacing, I would say spacing's important as well.
What is it particularly about spacing that helps?
It's having enough space between the lines so that I can separate the information, and also that if I am scanning the information, so that I'm not overloading at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind that I do not have dyslexia, but that's also something that's really beneficial for those that have.
Hmm.
So if I find it useful to have a bit more separation between the lines, so the more crammed together they are, the harder it is for me to read, retain, and scan the information because it just becomes a block of color rather than separate
Mm.
information.
Yeah. So I think that leads on quite nicely to things like sentence and paragraph lengths as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
So nice short sentences, nice short paragraphs, and if possible, bullet point. So it's easy. Oh, okay. See these highlights, and that can make more sense because where I work, there was an email that went out and go, what is this person on about? Can't make a head and a tail of it because it's too much dense information. I go, yeah, I'm not really doing what you're saying.
I was having a conversation with somebody I was coaching last night, and we were talking about um, the pace of how we speak and how important that is to pay attention to sometimes.
Yeah.
Because when we place gaps in our conversation, we give processing space to people so that they can keep up. We create chunks of information. We can do that verbally, but that's also what the bullet points do.
Hmm.
If you have, and I know that I worked with some people who I felt like they were allergic to full stops, and it would be really difficult for me to follow the paragraphs because it would almost be stressful by the time I got to the end. Because not only was I reading it almost metaphorically out of breath because there's no breath gaps for me to stop and pause, but I'd also lost the meaning in the first three lines of the never-ending sentence.
Yeah.
Now I know I can be sometimes quite guilty of that. I do like a long sentence, but at least I put commas in. But what I'll do is I'll write the long sentence because it's almost like that brain vomit. And then I'll go back and it's almost like I gamify it to see how many sentences I can make out of one
Hmm.
so that it becomes shorter and segmented.
Yeah. And this is also where tools like Goblin AI come in really useful.
Yeah. Goblin AI is a lot of fun.
Yeah. So if you are doing those really long sentences, you can use these tools obviously to make sentences shorter. You could be more sarcastic with them if you want to play around with that kind of thing. So it can be
You
quite
did like
enjoyable.
that about
Uh-huh.
Goblin AI, didn't you?
Yeah, good tool.
More snarky and less snarky.
Hmm.
And for anybody who hasn't come across Goblin AI, do have a Google.
Yeah.
It's really good and it's free and it's there's a formatting tool on it and you can get to pick your tone.
And we're not getting paid for this either.
And we're not getting paid for that. This isn't a sponsor, this is just a personal favorite.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's plenty of tools out there to make or to help with making understanding delivery of
Hmm.
these subjects or topics easier to access for people.
Well, the other thing you and I were talking about was the reading age
Mm,
people. And it's one thing that I think a lot of organizations underestimate is the average reading age. And the average reading age, depending on inner cities, etc., and regions across the UK, is between 8 and 12 years old.
yeah.
I'm going to say that again, between 8 and 12 years old. And that's going to underline the need for really straightforward language.
Hmm.
Sometimes, especially when you see formal communication, it gets overly pompous, is the word maybe. It's almost like it falls into the trap of wanting to use, and don't get me wrong, I'm a language fan. I love words, but there's a time and a place for that.
Yeah, so you're kind of saying is right to your audience. So it's the red, it's like the red label tabloids, isn't it? Your Sun and the Mirror and all that. Is those simple, easy to read newspapers that give a bit of information, but not too much.
Keep it as simple as you
Mm.
can, as possible. It'll increase the readability, it increases the engagement. It also increases the speed at which people can understand and process the information. All of that's a win.
Yeah.
You start to look at sentence length, paragraph gaps, use the gaps in paragraphs to separate topics, use bold sparingly,
And
make it bold.
underlining as well.
Underlining, I'm not a fan of. And again, that's a bit like um it's a bit like the numbers you get on houses where they put butterflies and flowers around about the numbers.
Oh yeah, nightmare.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so if you have dyscalculia, that's so much distraction going on and biz round about the number that the number challenge on top of the extra biz round about it makes it even worse.
Mm,
Underlining's a bit like that too. It
yeah.
adds stress.
And if you got any quick takeaways, have you then, Ali?
Well, we focus quite a lot on the written word here. And when I say we focus quite a lot, I mean literally we've just scraped the surface. There's so much we could add in terms of look at color contrast. You know, the stark black on white can be quite distracting, especially if people are working a lot on screens. It causes eye strain. It can be difficult to read. It causes glare, sensory overwhelm. But for me, I think the key takeaway is the power of understanding what works for the
Mhm.
majority. And if it works for one, instead of seeing it as an adaptation you need to make just for one person, consider whether or not that's an adaptation that would benefit everyone.
Yeah.
So if you're using Times New Roman and you decide as your company font that you're going to simplify the font, you may well find that actually it benefits a lot of people in your organization. If you start using shorter paragraphs, splitting up shorter sentences, bullet pointing critical information, you might suddenly find that everybody has better understanding.
Hmm.
Before I ask you for what your takeaways are, Rich, I'm going to share an example because I think it's relevant in terms of that bullet points, paragraphs, and the bold. Sometimes you have to be very, very, very clear about what it is you want to achieve and what the expected outcome of what it is you need in that situation. And we sometimes lose that in amongst all the words. So people don't understand why they're actually reading it.
Hmm.
And in one business I work with, We used to do an employee survey every year, and every year we got hammered for not giving business updates and not sharing news about the business. And it was really frustrating because we religiously, as a leadership team, presented to the entire business over a 24-hour period in small groups, and I do mean everyone, the business updates and all the key news, and gave them a chance for questions and answers. Yet every year we got hammered for not doing it. And then we sat down, we decided we were going to make one critical change. And we put this change in play. And the next year, the employee survey came back, and our scores for communication shot through the roof. Do you know what that one change was? We started every business update by saying, you asked us to share more information about the business and update you regularly. This is us updating you regularly. This is the fourth time we've done that this year. We'll do this again next year. So let us update you now. That's the only change. We hadn't specifically told them this was this
Hmm.
experience even now. It's a bit like being clear about what you want in your communication.
Yeah.
So what's your takeaways?
Could be, well, it is that if it makes sense to you, does it make sense to somebody else? So is it worthwhile spending a couple of minutes asking somebody else in your team who you may know may have neurodifference or something, and asking them what they think of what you've written or what you're about to communicate? And is that easy read or is a simpler way of doing it? It's not about dumbing people down. It's about getting information out that people require.
I'm just smiling because I'm just thinking that that's something that you and I do a lot. And quite often you will make comments or suggestions about stuff I've written, just as I'll make comments and feedback about stuff that you've written.
Hmm.
Don't always agree, but
No,
quite often the end product ends up
a lot better.
a lot better from what it started out.
Yeah. And if you'd like to find out more how we can support you and your organizations,
And bear in mind that what we're saying applies to everybody. So even if you think you don't have somebody that you would consider to be neurodifferent or neurodivergent within your population, we are all different.
mhm, well, who are you communicating to and with? Is it just within your company organization, or is it there a broader spectrum of people you're talking to?
Yeah. And if this is something you would like to be better at, you would like your organization to improve at or your team to improve at, then give us a shout and we'll
Hmm.
quite happily have a conversation with you about that.
Yes. So you can email us or drop us a message on LinkedIn or Facebook, and you can email us at hello@whatmakesdifference.org.
You can indeed. And then we'll come back to you and we'll have a conversation about it.
Yes.